The night of the family dinner wasn't just a meal. It was an execution of my worth. My name is Sophia. I'm 24 years old, and until that night, I thought family dinners were supposed to be about laughter, stories, and togetherness. Instead, mine became the night my parents cut me open with words sharper than any knife on the table. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear them echo. The table was crowded with relatives, cousins balancing plates, aunts whispering gossip, and my brother sitting smug with a glass of wine. Candles flickered, dishes clattered, but underneath it all was a tension I couldn't name yet. I remember smoothing my napkin nervously across my lap, trying to feel like I belonged there. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time they'd see me for something more than the background shadow of the family. I caught Mom's eye across the table. She leaned close to Dad, whispering something that made him chuckle. Then his voice rose, not just for me, but for the whole room to hear. "You know, Sophia," he said, his fork clinking against his plate. "You've always been the most useless child we have." The laughter around the table froze. Forks stopped midair. A cousin gasped softly, and I swear I could feel every set of eyes digging into me. My chest tightened. I waited for him to laugh, to say he was joking. But his face stayed hard, eyes sharp, as if he'd been saving those words for years. I forced myself to speak, though my throat felt like sandpaper. "Dad, why would you say that?" He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "It's true. Look at your brother. Look at your sister. They've made us proud. You've given us nothing." My mother nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We're just being honest, Sophia. Maybe honesty will finally wake you up." And just like that, the words I had always feared became public record. In front of every relative, every friend, they stripped me bare. Do you know what it feels like when the people who gave you life decide to take away your dignity? It doesn't come with screams or broken plates. It comes with silence, the kind that presses on your chest until breathing feels like a crime. I scanned the table, hoping someone, anyone, would defend me. But my cousins looked down at their plates, my aunts exchanged awkward glances, and my brother smirked like he'd just won a prize. "Don't look at me like that," Dad continued, stabbing his steak with his fork. "We raised you, gave you everything, and this is all you've amounted to. You should be ashamed." Something cracked inside me. Sadness twisted into anger, anger into humiliation, and humiliation into a strange, icy calm. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But instead, I sat there, my hands trembling in my lap, my mind whispering, "Don't give them the satisfaction." I leaned back in my chair, steadying my voice even though it shook inside. "You really think I'm useless?" Dad laughed, a low, bitter laugh. "We don't think, Sophia. We know that was the moment. The moment I realized their love wasn't conditional, it was counterfeit. And counterfeit love always crumbles under pressure." I looked around the table one last time. Relatives shifting uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others whispering behind hands. The dinner that should have been warm and safe had turned into a courtroom. And I was the accused. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe someone you love has told you that you're nothing, right when you needed them most. Tell me, if your parents looked you in the eye and called you useless in front of everyone, what would you do? I stayed quiet, swallowing the tears that burned in my throat. Because I knew in that moment, my silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. The night dragged on, every bite of food tasting like ash. I couldn't even lift my fork without hearing Dad's words repeating in my head. My mother avoided my eyes, and my brother basked in my humiliation. I felt like an outsider at my own table, erased from my own bloodline. By the time the plates were cleared, I wasn't just humiliated. I was changed. Something inside me shifted. A tiny seed of defiance that had been buried under years of being overlooked. That night, it broke the surface. I walked away from the table in silence, my footsteps echoing through the hall. My chest hurt, my face burned, but my heart was no longer begging for their approval, because in one sentence, they didn't just insult me. They shattered me, and in one sentence, they taught me who I truly was. In one sentence, they shattered me in front of everyone. The room went quiet, except for the echo of their words burning in my ears. I sat frozen at the dinner table, staring at the silverware that suddenly felt too heavy to lift. My father's voice still lingered like smoke, poisoning the air. The most useless child we have. I replayed it over and over, as if my mind wanted to carve it into my skin. Around me, the silence wasn't kind. It was suffocating. Chairs creaked, glasses clinked, but no one dared to break the tension. My mother avoided my eyes, pretending to cut into her food. My cousins whispered, their forks scraping against plates as if to fill the void. And then there was my brother. His smirk stretched wider, feeding off my humiliation like it was the main course. I wanted to disappear. To vanish right there between the candlelight and the plates of roasted chicken. But instead, I sat perfectly still, every muscle in my body tight with shame. My aunt leaned closer to another relative, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. Poor girl, but they're not wrong. That whisper hit harder than my father's words. Because it wasn't just my parents. It was everyone. Every glance, every shrug, every silence at that table was a verdict. Guilty of being nothing. My mother finally spoke, her tone sharp as if to cut me off before I could defend myself. Don't make a scene, Sophia, just accept the truth. I blinked at her, the woman who raised me, now dismissing me like I was an embarrassment she wanted to hide. Accept the truth? I whispered back, my voice trembling. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Enough, we won't argue about this. Eat your food and be grateful we still let you sit at this table. The sting of his words wasn't just the insult, it was the command. I wasn't family, I was a guest. And even that felt temporary. The humiliation spread like fire across my skin. I looked at my brother, his glass raised, eyes glittering with satisfaction. He leaned toward me and muttered, "Told you they'd see it one day." That was the moment my sadness shifted, just slightly, into anger. A spark. Small but dangerous, I wanted to scream at all of them, to slam my fists on the table and remind them of everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd endured in silence. But instead I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. Do you know what it feels like to be erased in front of everyone you love? To sit at a table where you're supposed to belong and realize you're just tolerated? If you were me, would you fight back right then? Or would you sit in silence, waiting for the right moment? The dinner dragged on, but the air was poisoned. Laughter from other corners of the room sounded forced, like people were trying to pretend nothing had happened. But I knew better. That night, every fork and knife became part of the judgment against me. When dessert was served, no one looked my way. It was as if I'd already disappeared, a ghost haunting my own family. My father clinked his glass to toast my brother's recent achievements, while I sat in the shadows. Invisible. Invisible, but not broken. Because while they thought they had ended me with words, they had actually given me something else, clarity. For the first time, I saw the truth of where I stood. Not as their daughter, not as their equal, but as their shame, and that truth, as brutal as it was, would become the fire that lit everything that came next. That night, I was no longer their daughter, just their shame. The truth is, humiliation doesn't just sting in the moment. It drags memories back like ghosts you thought you'd buried. As I sat there at the table, still burning from their words, flashes from the past flooded me. Times when I had bent myself in half for this family, only to be treated like nothing. I remembered the night I gave up a college trip because my parents said they couldn't afford my younger brother's new football gear. I smiled back then, told them it was fine, even though my heart ached. I convinced myself family mattered more. Another memory cut through, when Mom was sick and couldn't get out of bed. I was 16, cooking dinner every night, helping with bills, even staying home from a dance so she wouldn't feel alone. But when my sister got sick years later, everyone rallied around her like she was royalty. Me, just expected, invisible. Funny how sacrifice looks different depending on who makes it. Even when I got my first job, I used my paycheck to help Dad with the mortgage one month. He said thank you once and never brought it up again. But when my brother chipped in a small amount years later, it became the story they bragged about to every relative. Look at how responsible he is. They'd beam. Meanwhile, my help was forgotten like it never happened. I tightened my grip on the napkin in my lap. My heart pounded with something sharper than sadness now. Anger. Because all those years I told myself they just didn't notice. That maybe one day they'd look back and realize I was the one who stayed, who held things together. But now I knew. They never saw me. My cousin leaned over to whisper, "Don't take it so hard." "They've always favored him." Always favored him. The words looped in my head like a cruel chant. I glanced at my brother again, his smug face, his raised glass. He lived in the spotlight I never even got a chance to stand under. And my parents? They had made that spotlight for him. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Maybe it wasn't that I was invisible. Maybe they chose not to see me, because seeing me would mean admitting how much they had taken from me. The anger built, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching me crack. Do you know that feeling? When your heart is screaming, but your lips stay sealed, because you know silence cuts deeper than words ever could. The laughter at the table sounded hollow now. Each giggle, each toast, each clink of glasses only reminded me how far, outside of this family circle, I really was. Thought back to birthdays I spent waiting for them to show up. Gifts wrapped in cheap paper they barely looked at before moving on. I thought about how, when I won an art contest at school, they said, "That's nice," and then quickly shifted the spotlight to my brother's soccer game. Piece by piece, memory by memory, I saw the truth form like shards of glass in front of me. I wasn't their disappointment, I was their shadow, and shadows don't get praised. Shadows don't get remembered. Shadows don't get loved the way light does. The ache in my chest deepened, but this time I didn't let it crush me. I let it sharpen me, because while they thought their words had destroyed me, they had only revealed what had always been true. I realized they never saw me. Only what I wasn't. The cruelest part wasn't the words themselves. It was how my sibling wore them like a crown. That night, after my parents cut me down at the dinner table, my brother leaned back in his chair like a king. He sipped his drink slowly, letting the silence stretch, and then smirked. "Well," he said, "at least one of us turned out right." The table burst into soft laughter, the kind that's meant to sting, not entertain. My mother shook her head, smiling proudly at him. My father clapped him on the back like he'd just won an award. And me? I sat there, swallowing pieces of myself, one by one. Do you know that feeling when everyone in the room seems to share the same joke? And the punchline is you? I kept my eyes on my plate, but every bite of food tasted like ashes. Remember when Sophia tried to run that little business? My aunt chimed in, eager to join the chorus. What was it again? Oh, right, it barely lasted a year. My cheeks burned. I wanted to defend myself, to say it wasn't failure, it was survival. That I had been juggling 2 jobs just to help with bills while still trying to chase my dream. But before I could speak, my father waved his hand dismissively. "She just doesn't have the same drive," he said, his voice calm, matter-of-fact, like he was explaining the weather. Not like her brother. And there it was again, the comparison. The invisible measuring stick they had been holding up my whole life. My brother leaned forward, enjoying the moment. "Don't be too hard on her," he said, mock sympathy dripping from his voice. "Not everyone is built for success." Laughter again. Another knife in my chest. I felt my heart racing, my palms sweating under the table. Part of me wanted to scream, to slam my hands down and demand they look at me, really see me. But I stayed quiet, because silence sometimes speaks louder than words. Inside, though, something shifted. For the first time, instead of breaking me, their cruelty was fueling me. I remembered the countless nights I had stayed awake, helping with chores, picking up slack no one else wanted. I remembered being the one who cleaned up their messes, unpaid, unnoticed, and now they sat here, celebrating the child who had never lifted a finger for anyone but himself. "Poor Sophia," my cousin whispered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. Always second best, I wanted to laugh. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't second best. I wasn't even on their scoreboard, and maybe that was my mistake. I had been playing a game I could never win, waiting for their approval, begging for their validation. But as I stared at my brother's smug grin, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't play anymore. They thought this dinner was a stage for my humiliation. But what they didn't know was that I was keeping score too, and one day, I'd make sure they never forgot how it felt when the tables turned. They didn't know I was keeping score. The night after that dinner, I couldn't breathe inside the house anymore. Their words kept echoing, bouncing off the walls of my room like cruel ghosts. Useless. Nothing. Disappointment. So I walked. The streets were quiet, The kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound louder than your heartbeat. Street lamps flickered above me, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. I tilted my head to the sky, looking for stars, but even the night seemed to have turned its back on me. I replayed every moment of that dinner. The laughter, the smirks, the way no one spoke up for me, not even once. And suddenly it wasn't just my parents who had failed me. It was everyone at that table. I thought about my cousin whispering second best, about my aunt mocking my failed business, about my brother smiling like a victor crowned at my expense. Do you know that feeling? When it seems like an entire room has agreed that you're worthless? It's a loneliness that cuts deeper than silence. I stopped under a lamppost, hugging my arms to my chest, and whispered to myself, why me? Why am I always the one they break? But the truth hit me as sharply as the cold air. I wasn't broken. Not yet. They stripped me of my place at the table, I muttered, my voice trembling but steadying with each word. But they didn't strip me of my voice, because I still had that. My story, my truth. And one day it would matter more than their approval. The wind picked up, tugging at my hair like even the night was listening. For the first time in years, I felt something spark inside me. Not warmth, not yet, but fire waiting for air. By the time I reached the end of the block, I knew one thing for certain. I had lost their love, but I hadn't lost my power. I had lost their love, but I hadn't lost my power. The morning after, I couldn't shake the weight of their words. My parents had declared me useless in front of everyone. But the truth was, it wasn't the first time. It had always been like this. Flashbacks hit me like sharp glass. My brother forgetting his homework, my mother rushing to finish it for him. Me bringing home top grades only to hear, that's what you're supposed to do. Him skipping chores without punishment. Me scrubbing floors while my father said, at least you're good for something. The time I saved money from part-time jobs to help pay the bills. My parents took it, thanked my brother for inspiring responsibility, and barely looked at me. Every memory was the same pattern, his mistakes celebrated, my efforts erased, and the cruelest part? I accepted it. For years, I believed their silence meant I wasn't enough. But walking through those memories now, I saw the truth. It wasn't that I lacked worth. It was that they refused to see it. They called me nothing, I whispered, replaying the moments like film reels. But nothing doesn't bleed. Nothing doesn't sacrifice. Nothing doesn't keep this family together in the shadows. Do you know what hurts the most? When you realize the people who raised you only valued you for what you could give, never for who you were. I remembered sitting in the audience at my brother's graduation. He got flowers, cheers, a framed photo. I got a pat on the shoulder, and maybe one day it'll be you. That day never came. And yet, in that ache, I felt something twist. Anger, because every insult, every dismissal, every time they brushed me aside, it wasn't wasted, it was fuel. And though I didn't know it then, that fuel would carry me through the fire I was about to walk into. I didn't see it then, but every wound they gave me was fuel. The living room glowed under warm lights, but the warmth didn't reach me. My parents sat at the head of the gathering, their voices carrying across the room as relatives leaned in. Every word they spoke felt like a performance, rehearsed to humiliate me. Some children bring honor, my father said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And some, well, they only bring shame, the room chuckled softly. My mother added, at least one of our kids turned out useful. Her eyes slid to my sibling, who smirked, basking in the attention. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, forcing myself not to tremble. The laughter stung, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. Inside, I whispered to myself, breathe, stay calm. Let them show who they are. Relatives whispered, some uncomfortable, others entertained. My sibling leaned close, their voice dripping with venom. See? You'll always be nothing. But me? I'm everything they ever wanted. I stared at my glass of water, the reflection trembling with the vibrations of my heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but silence was sharper. Silence turned their cruelty into echoes that clung to the walls. One relative shifted uneasily. Another avoided my gaze. They saw the cruelty but chose silence too. That silence cut just as deep. My mother raised her glass. To our pride and joy, she said, nodding toward my sibling. Applause followed. No one toasted me. No one even looked my way, and yet I smiled faintly, not out of joy but awareness. They believed they had stripped me of worth, reduced me to ashes in front of witnesses. But ashes carry embers, and embers can burn. They thought I was broken, but broken glass cuts deepest. I learned long ago that silence makes people careless. While they mocked me, they never imagined I was listening, watching, remembering. Their laughter blinded them to the fact that every insult was sharpening my clarity. Late nights became my escape. While the house slept, I combed through drawers, old files, and the digital trails they thought no one cared about. Bank statements, letters, unsigned contracts, all scattered breadcrumbs of the empire they bragged about. At first, I only wanted answers. But soon patterns emerged. Loans unpaid, investments collapsing, money borrowed in shadows. Their prideful empire was fragile, held together by appearances and lies. One document stopped me cold, a hidden agreement signed in my sibling's name, tying them to a debt they pretended didn't exist. Another file revealed accounts my parents had drained to cover mistakes. They thought they were untouchable. They weren't. The next morning at breakfast, my father boasted about stability. My mother praised my siblings' brilliance. I smiled quietly, biting back the truth that their world was built on cracks. My siblings sneered at me across the table. "Still useless?" they asked. I looked down at my plate, nodding slightly, but inside I whispered, "If only you knew who's useless now." Every insult gave me fuel. Every humiliation gave me patience. Because I now held what they didn't even realize was slipping away, the thread. One pull and everything they built would unravel. I didn't need to fight loudly. I only needed to wait. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. They didn't realize. I was holding the thread of their empire. The first crack didn't come from me. It came from them. Whispers spread in the neighborhood, rumors about overdue bills and failed business deals. People who once bowed to my parents now raised eyebrows instead. At family gatherings, the admiration they craved was replaced with awkward silence. The air that once smelled of pride now reeked of something else. Fear. One night, as relatives filled the dining room, my father's forced laughter rang too loudly. His glass shook as he raised it. "To family," he said, but even he couldn't mask the unease in his eyes. My mother smiled thinly, her hand gripping his arm too tightly, as if steadying a man who was slipping. Then it happened. A relative leaned forward and asked, "Is it true? The bank's after you?" The words dropped like stones into still water, rippling through the room. Forks froze. Eyes darted. My father's face hardened. He cleared his throat, forcing confidence into his voice. Lies were stronger than ever, but another relative whispered, "Stronger? Then why the unpaid debts?" The silence that followed felt heavier than any insult I had ever endured. My parents looked around desperately, searching for someone to shield them. No one did. Instead, eyes turned toward me. "Maybe Sophia knows," someone said, half teasing, half serious. My mother's head snapped toward me. Her voice dripped with venom. "Don't drag her into this. She's never been useful. Why would she know anything?" The words stung, but this time I didn't flinch. I simply looked at her, steady and calm, my silence cutting deeper than any defense. My sibling, smirking, chimed in. "She wouldn't understand numbers even if they spelled out failure." Laughter rippled nervously through the table, but the cracks were showing. Their performance was unraveling in front of the very people they wanted to impress. Every denial sounded weaker. Every excuse only proved the whispers true. My father slammed his hand against the table. "Enough!" he barked. The plates rattled, the glasses trembled, but his authority did not return. Instead, the room only grew colder. I leaned back, letting the chaos unfold. For years, they had stripped me of dignity, mocked me in public, and built their pride on my silence. But tonight, silence was my weapon. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to shout. Every lie they told collapsed under its own weight. And every gaze that shifted toward me told me the same thing. The world was finally seeing them as they truly were. And so I stayed still, unbroken, my silence cutting through the noise. Silence can be sharper than any scream. Desperation has a smell. It clings to the air, heavy and sour, and that night my parents reeked of it. After the gathering, they pulled me aside into the kitchen. The room was dim, lit only by the hum of the overhead bulb. My father's voice, once thunder, now cracked like dry wood. "Sophia, you have to stand with us. People are starting to believe lies. Help us fix this." I stared at him, stunned. This was the same man who, only hours ago, had called me useless in front of the world. Now his eyes begged for my strength. My mother reached for my hand, her grip trembling. "You're our daughter," she said, her tone dripping with sudden sweetness. Family must stand together? I almost laughed. For years they had reminded me that I wasn't their pride, only their burden. And now when the storm came, I was suddenly their daughter? In that silence, a question pressed against my chest like fire. Would you forgive your parents? Or let them face their own storm? I didn't answer immediately. I let the weight of my pause fill the room, let them squirm in it. My siblings stood at the door, arms crossed, lips curled into a sneer. "Don't act like you're above this, Sophia. Without us, you're nothing." I turned to them slowly, my voice calm, sharp. "Without you, I am finally free." The color drained from their face, and for the first time, I saw fear there. The tension thickened as my father slammed his hand against the counter. "Don't you dare turn on us now. You'll regret it," but his voice no longer carried power. It carried panic. I took a step back, letting their desperation echo against the walls. They had stripped me of love, dignity, and place. But now, all they had left was need, and it belonged to me. Their desperation became my crown. It happened slowly, then all at once. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became gossip. Gossip became judgment. By the next family gathering, the storm that once shielded my parents had turned against them. Neighbors who used to nod with admiration now crossed the street. Friends who once clung to their name now whispered behind their backs. Relatives, once eager to bask in their pride, looked at them with suspicion. And then came the moment. We were seated at a long dining table, the same kind that had once been their stage to mock me. But tonight the spotlight shifted. An uncle cleared his throat. "So, is it true that you've lost everything?" My father stiffened. My mother's hand trembled on her lap. "We're fine," she said too quickly, her voice brittle. The room didn't believe her. My sibling tried to interrupt, sneering in my direction. "She's probably the one spreading lies," but then a relative cut in sharply. "No, Sophia hasn't said a word. We can see it with our own eyes." The weight of the room pressed down on them. For once, all eyes weren't on me. They were on them. I sat silently, watching, as their fortress of arrogance crumbled brick by brick. My father's denial, my mother's excuses, my siblings' mockery, none of it worked anymore. Every sentence they spoke only confirmed what everyone already knew. They weren't untouchable. They were human, flawed, and fragile. The air grew heavy with humiliation. My mother's eyes darted, her voice shaking as she tried to protest. We just need time." But no one rushed to comfort her. No one defended them. Instead, the silence of the crowd felt louder than any insult, and in that silence I found my victory. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need revenge written in fire. Their downfall was written in whispers, in gasps, in the tremble of their own voices. For the first time, their voices trembled. Not mine. The night was heavy, the air thick with silence. For the first time, my parents stood before me not as rulers of the household, but as beggars of mercy. My father's shoulders sagged, his voice unsteady. "Sophia, we were wrong. We need you. Please help us rebuild what's falling apart." My mother's eyes, once sharp with judgment, now glistened with tears. She reached out, her hands trembling. "You're still our daughter. Don't let this be the end." Their words struck me harder than any insult ever had. Because this time they weren't thrown at me like weapons. They were whispered like pleas. I took a slow breath, steadying the storm inside me. "You want me to stand with you?" I asked, my voice calm, almost cold. "Then you will stand with me. No more insults, no more comparisons, no more treating me as less." They exchanged nervous glances, like children caught in a lie. My sibling muttered from the corner, "She's bluffing. She'll come crawling back." I turned sharply toward them, my voice cutting like glass. "No, not anymore. The only way forward is respect, boundaries, and truth. Without that, you lose me forever." The room grew heavier. My father opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came. My mother nodded faintly, her pride battling with her desperation. It wasn't victory I felt. It was clarity. For years I had begged for love, for scraps of dignity. Tonight, they were the ones begging, and so I gave them my answer. I'm not here to forgive you, I said, locking eyes with each of them. I'm here to give you a choice. You either accept the truth of who I am, or you lose me forever. I gave them a choice, not forgiveness, but truth. The days after were quiet, almost eerily so. No more public humiliations. No more whispered insults at family dinners. My parents walked softer around me, their words careful, their eyes watchful. But the truth was, I no longer needed their approval. I found myself walking alone one evening, the cool air brushing against my face, and I realized something. It had never been revenge I wanted. Not really. What I wanted was dignity. My own voice. A place at the table where I didn't need to beg for space. I thought back to that night. The night they called me useless. At the time, it felt like the end of my world. But now, standing here, I understood it was the beginning, because betrayal has a way of breaking you open. And once you're open, you can finally hear your own voice. I remembered the smirks, the whispers, the silence of those who watched me suffer. They thought they had silenced me forever. Instead, they had carved the fire into my chest that gave me strength. I didn't rise to destroy them. I rose to rebuild myself. Looking back, I no longer see myself as the forgotten child, the one erased from her own family's story. I see myself as the author of a new story, one where my worth isn't defined by their words, but by my own. The slap of betrayal wasn't at the dinner table. It was in their words. But those words became the reason I found my voice, and no one will silence me again.